Good afternoon, everyone, or whatever time of day it might be for you. Today we're going to learn how to convert old models from Tabula and Techne into Blockbench. A couple of things you need to know before we get started. Blockbench is the third modeling program that Digimobs has used. The first one was Techne. Back in the day, it was the only modeling program really available. I don't have much experience with it because by the time I came along, we were using Tabula. Tabula is probably what about half of the models you'll be working with are in. The other half would be in Techne. If that's not how they're split up, I'm sorry. I don't really know what the models I didn't make were made in. A few differences between Blockbench and Tabula and Techne. Both of those programs had cubes because you're making cube-shaped models. They didn't have bones, though. What they had were folders. And they worked a little bit differently from bones, so you'll notice that there are a few differences when you get the model into Blockbench. So we're here in Blockbench. We are going to start, as you should be starting every project, by going to File, New, Modded Entity, because you're making an entity, and then whatever Digimon you're switching over, you will name the file name that name. I'll be doing one Tabula model and one Techne model. I'll start with the Tabula model because it's a little more familiar to me, and for that I will be using Salamon. So you name it Salamon. Don't worry about the texture size right now because the texture should import when you import your model file. You are going to confirm it, then you're going to go back up here and you're going to go to Import. So you have Import Project, which would import another Blockbench project, import Tabula model, a .tbl file, or a Techne model, which is a .tcn. So we're going to import a Tabula model, and it will open up whichever folder you last used. I'm going to black this part out because you guys can't see some of these files yet. But just find wherever you put your model that you're hoping to use, and you'll see any Tabula files that are in that folder showing up. Nothing else will show up because you can't import it as a Tabula file. And I am going to select Salamon. So we import Salamon. It takes a few minutes, and there she is. So you can tell that's Salamon, but it doesn't look right. And that is because Tabula did not have bones, it just had blocks, and you would attach blocks directly to other blocks. When you import to Blockbench, it splits every single block up into a bone and a block. The bone gets the rotation points, and the block gets the shape, size, size and texture. So you will notice that every single cube in your model has a folder, and you'll also notice that not all of them are in the right place. That is because, for reasons unknown to me, when you import a model from Tabula into Blockbench, it switches the Z orientation, which is the blue one. Over here on the side where your element specifications are listed, you'll see rotation. You have red, which is X, green, which is Y, and blue, which is Z. So what you're going to do is you're going to start at the top, and you're going to go through and you're going to find every single folder, or every single bone, I guess, and every single bone that has a value that isn't 0 in this box, in the Z orientation box, or the Z rotation box. You're going to switch the negatives to positives, and you're going to switch the positives to negatives. If you don't know what a negative number is, it's the number with a minus sign before it. If in that box is a number with a minus sign before it, you're going to delete the minus sign. Not all of them will have these, but because of the way Salamon is made, she has quite a few of them. So you are going to go through and you're going to switch them. And you'll see her body, this ring of her body just filled out quite nicely. So these were the changes you just made. Now this block is size 0, 0, 0. Not every model will have these. Besides me, I'm not sure how many people were actually doing this back in the Tabula days, but basically what I would do to make things easier for me is if I wanted a bone, I would just make a 0, 0, 0 block, and put it where I wanted the rotation point to be, and then attach all the other blocks to that. It's not super important if you check for these, because there will generally only be maybe 20 in a model, but if you notice them, I usually labeled them base, so if you're doing one of my models, you might notice a block with base at the end. If you're doing someone else's model and you notice a block with base at the end, it might be worth checking if its size is 0, 0, 0. If it is, it's not actually visible, so you can just delete that. So now we have this ring, and we fixed it, and we have all of these blocks, and they're each on their own bone. And we can see that it's how it's supposed to look, so we know we fixed it. So what we're going to do is we're going to resolve each of these folders. Basically what this does is it takes the rotation from the bone and the size from the block, and I believe the orientation is also on the bone, but it combines them. So instead of a folder or bone and a block, you just combine them. Now it's important to make sure that you've actually done the Z rotation switching before you do this, because if you resolve a bone and you haven't switched it yet, you can't fix it. You're going to have to undo it until you find your problem and redo it from there. Alright, so now we have this bone, and it's got its 8 blocks attached to it. And we have its pivot point, which when I was building it, I used to move it around. Like we talked about in those videos where I showed you how to do curves, I usually put them on bones even today, just because I can move them around more easily. Salomon is a finished model. I don't anticipate making any changes to her. So I'm going to go ahead and just resolve this base as well. The benefit of doing this, besides making your model tree shorter, is that when you go to animate it, if you still had all those bones, they would all show up on your animation tree, so you would have to sort through 593 bones to find the bones, the actual bones that you wanted to rotate it, because most of them would just be bones for individual cubes. So this may seem tedious, but it will make your life a lot easier down the line. I'm going to finish her body quickly, I'll edit that bit out, and we'll be back soon. Alright, so it's been about 25 minutes, and I've now got Salomon's body. I've got the rotation points fixed, and I've got all of the extra bones resolved. So if we look over here, we will see, instead of all of those bones, it's just a whole bunch of blocks. So that is part 1. And now that we're done the body, we get to the arms, legs, head, tail, etc. Generally speaking, the rotations, the places where the bones should be will be in capitals. It depends who made the model originally. I can't promise that will always be the case, but for this one, that is very much the case. So we have the neck rotation here. If we switch to the rotate, we'll see the rotation point is here, which looks about right. Now that you can just make a bone and you don't have to label a block as a bone, I have been getting rid of the rotation on all of these and just calling it neck, still in capitals. That's a preference for you. The more you do, the more you'll kind of notice that you start having your own conventions, which will just make it easier for you. So we have the neck. The neck is not flipped, which is kind of nice. This neck rotation is a 0, 0, 0, so I'm going to delete it. And you'll notice I'm down by about 20 blocks from what I was before I did the body. So if you notice those 0, 0, 0 blocks, it does make a difference. So here we are, we've got the neck, we've got a base for the collar, and then we've got all the collar blocks. So this is also 0, 0, 0, so I'm going to get rid of that. And then, now the reason you'll notice me opening all of the files before I make any, or all of the bones before I make any changes to them, is because they are nested. If you changed the rotation on this, it doesn't have a rotation, but if it did, this one does not also, but if it did and you changed it and resolved it, It would add the correct rotation to the possibly incorrect rotation on these below it. So you have to start from the lowest folder on the chain and work your way back when you're resolving, or it's not going to turn out right. These, we are in luck because none of them are rotated, so I can go ahead and just quickly resolve those out and do the same for the rest of the neck. Again, it's important to check every time because you never know when there will be a variation in the model. And again, just open every bone before you do anything to it, because if there's another bone hidden inside of it, you need to deal with that one first. And we're also going to get rid of this one. So now we are up to the head. I'm going to rename it to just head. F2 will rename. And we open it up and we see all of its subfolders. I'm going to delete that because I'm pretty sure it's hidden inside. So now we've got the ear. Back in the day, Tabula and Techne didn't have the vertex snap button. So if you wanted to attach things end to end, you had to attach them directly to each other instead of just snapping them together, which is why you'll find these chains of parent and child blocks. It doesn't matter too much if you don't understand why, you just have to understand how to undo it. So you open up the whole chain and you start at the bottom, nothing to fix here, nothing to fix here. This one we do need to fix. So change the positive 15.65 to negative 16.65. We are going to change this, and that one's fine. So we know this chain is all right because we checked each one individually. And so we're going to just resolve those out. Now here we have two folders inside this ear 3 folder, so you have to check both of them because you never know what's happening there. Right now we are in luck because none of those 4, 5, and 6 have anything to fix. But if you hadn't checked, you wouldn't know. So we're going to change that, and we know all of this is right. This is tedious, but it's also not that difficult as long as you're kind of paying attention to it. You can put on music, your Netflix show, whatever you kids do these days. And we're going to change that. And surprise, surprise, something is wrong. I'm guessing what I did is I just moved the bone out by 1. So I'm going to bring this, and I'm going to snap it to the block above it because it's 2021 and we're using Blockbench and we can do that. So problem averted. It looks fine. So we're going to resolve all of it. The rotation, I'm going to change that to just say right here. And the pivot point is in the right place for what we want it to do. It is backwards because of this being 180. So when you animate it, it will go the other way. You'll just have to work around that. And if we want it to go backwards while she's walking, it goes like that. So we have one ear. We still have the other ear. Salomon has 2 identical ears, so instead of fixing the whole left ear, I'm going to delete it. I'm going to duplicate the right ear. I'm going to rename it to left ear, and I'm going to flip it along the x-axis. That is perfectly valid. The only time you can't do that is if the left and right aren't the same. Something like Lady Devimon, which has 1 human arm and 1 giant monster arm. If you delete one arm and duplicate the other arm, you will have 2 human arms or 2 giant monster arms. Anything with texture variations, like if she had, say, an earring on one ear, you'd have to be aware of that while you're doing this, so you didn't either delete the earring or end up with 2. But generally speaking, the left and right sides will be more or less the same, so you can generally do this. Use your judgment, pay attention, and you will be fine. So now we have the head. The head is Another spear. I believe, and I might be wrong, but I believe it's made differently from the first one. No, it's the same. So again, we are going to have to fix the entire thing. I'll edit this part out as well. I'll be back in probably about 20 minutes. Alright, so it's been another 20 minutes or so, and in that time I have resolved the folders and corrected the angles on Salamon's head and her muzzle. I'm going to leave the muzzle piece separate. If you watched my video on how to make heads, you will kind of know where this piece came from. It just gives her that cute little cheek look. I don't anticipate reusing this model for anything in the future, but if I do and I want to be able to, you know, make her that shape for whatever reason, or make her muzzle shorter, I can. So we have fixed her head. She still kind of looks like an eldritch horror. We'll get to the texture later. For now, we are worried about the blocks. So next up, we have this one. If you can't tell what this says, it is FR as in front right leg upper rotation. At the time, that's how I was naming things. Right now, I am going to rename it, and I'm going to call it right shoulder. That's not how you spell shoulder. Now, this is actually her left shoulder, and her right ear is actually on her left side. When you import a model to Blockbench, it flips the entire model. Once we've fixed everything else, we will fix that, so don't worry about that. Just make sure all the rights are on one side and all the lefts are on the other, and it will work out in the end. So we've got the right shoulder, no Z rotation. We are going to open it up. This happens to be 0, 0, 0, and you'll notice as I work through the model and notice and get rid of those 0, 0, 0 rotation point cubes, my model size is getting smaller. Keeping the files small is less important now than it was 10 years ago because computers have gotten better, but it's still something that's worth aiming for. So if you can make the file smaller, you probably should. FR leg lower rotation. Now, my personal preference, and you by no means have to follow this, is even on a quadrupedal animal like Salomon, instead of having front right leg and back right leg, I'm going to have right leg and right arm. It doesn't matter because no one in game is going to be able to see it. It just keeps my names a little shorter, and it helps me differentiate between the front leg and the back leg with fewer characters in my block name, which just makes it a little easier to read when you're scanning through it quickly. So this isn't an elbow, this is a knee on the front leg, but I'm still going to call it right elbow. Now, if you were to bend this, it bends like this, it bends like a knee. If it really was an elbow, the pivot point would be back here, and it would bend this way, but it doesn't. If you don't know what an elbow and a knee is, look at your elbows and knees and see how they bend. I can't help you much more than that. So there's a base. I'm going to open all of these up one at a time and see what's going on. And I'm going to switch all of these Z rotations. Tabula models will generally have rotations that aren't even numbers. When you clicked and dragged the rotation tool in Tabula, it would go by 2.61, 5.22, 7.83, and so on. I don't know why. I just kind of went with it. So we have this. Now we have the right elbow. And you'll see there's a gap here. That may look bad, but it is there because we fixed the orientations on these, and we haven't fixed them on these yet. The legs, once we finish, they will slope outwards towards the wrists and ankles. So we're going to open the elbow folder up, the elbow bone up, delete the 000 piece, delete this base piece. I did not realize how many invisible cubes I was making when I made this model. It's probably one of the worst ones for this. The benefit of doing it now, so you guys can see, is that this is something that is very fixable, and once it's gone, your model tree will look, I guess it's called an outliner now, your outline will look a whole lot better. So we are going to resolve that, and now you can see that gap is closed, and her leg slopes out towards her foot, just like the Salomon artwork. And for our foot rotation is going to become right wrist. I know it's not a wrist, but it makes it easier for me to navigate. So we are going to open these up, and there are a lot of subfolders in here. So we are going to open each one, and we are going to check it for problems. As I go through each one on this foot 15 block, nothing comes up in this, so we don't need to change any of those. You can either resolve it now if you're confident that you've made all the changes you need to make, or you can leave it till the end and actually make sure the foot looks right before you do any resolving. So now we're going to open this up, same process. You look inside every single folder, and here is a problem, so we're going to flip that. Here's another problem. That's fine, and we need to flip this. And in here, we need to flip this. Alright, so we have what looks like a fixed foot. The other feet are still expanded all over the place, so I'm just going to move it quickly to the side and make sure it is a fixed foot, and indeed it is. So I'm going to move it back in. If I was making this today, there are some other things I would do. I probably wouldn't worry so much about getting the top rounded out, but going back and fixing every single model is way too much work. And as you model and time goes on, your stylistic preferences will change. That doesn't mean the way that you did things in the past is any worse. It just means you've grown as a modeler. So I'm not going to worry about changing that. Alright, so now this right shoulder, right elbow, right wrist piece is completely resolved and completely corrected. 33 blocks in the whole piece, that is not too bad. 38 on the other side, and Salomon's front legs are identical, so I'm going to delete that. I'm going to duplicate that, and I'm going to flip it. Rename this to left shoulder, left elbow, left wrist. And we now have two of her front legs, and she's starting to look like the cute little puppy bunny that she should look like when we are finished. Her back legs, looking at the art and just remembering how I did them when I made this model the first time, I'm pretty sure they're similar, or I'm pretty sure they're the same, but I'm not positive. So I'm going to manually correct one of her back legs and then duplicate it, just like I did with her front legs. So I will do that quickly, and I will be back. Alright, so now I've got all four legs fixed. She is coming together quite nicely. All we have left to do in terms of fixing the actual blocks themselves is the tail. So this is the tail piece. Now you'll notice I actually didn't put a tail rotation on the first time I made this model. She has her tail base, which is located here at the end of the tail. But that is it. Not too sure why I made that decision originally. But with Blockbench, you can move pivots around quite easily. So you go to your pivot tool here, or you press P to switch to it. And you can click and drag and get it. Get your pivot where you want the rotation point for the tail to be located. Maybe you want your Salomon to be able to wag her tail. Maybe you want to move it when she sits. so it doesn't clip into the ground. There are lots of reasons to be able to move her tail. Generally speaking, if this puppy rabbit was a real creature, you would probably expect her to be able to move her tail, so the model probably should be able to. And you will run into situations where there should be a rotation, where there isn't. You can go ahead and add it. That likely won't bother anyone. So we've got the tail, we've moved it around. I'm going to rename this pivot, or this bone, tail. Get rid of the 0, 0, 0 block. Get rid of this one too while I'm at it. And then I'm going to go ahead and flip and resolve the tail, and I'll be back in a minute. Alright, so now we are finished fixing the blocks. This looks like a Salomon minus the face. It is floating, so in order to fix that, we take the entire model and you move it down. This here is where the ground will be in relation to the model. So you move it until the model's feet are standing on the ground. Now we get to fixing the texture. Over here we have the texture with Tabula. It comes loaded. This isn't what a Blockbench texture would look like. Back in the day with Tabula, you would you'd make your model, you would save a texture map, and then you would import it to a separate art program, and you would paint one block at a time until you thought you had what you wanted. Then you would add it back into your model file and see if it worked right, and just go back and forth until you liked what you were looking at. Today we can paint directly onto the model using our paint tab up here. So things are a lot easier today. A few things to fix. The eyes don't meet up. We're going to mirror the UV so that they do. Sometimes the eyes will be identical and just on opposite sides of the head. Salomon and a lot of the Digimon that are basically just blobs with faces have more detailed eyes just to give them some character. You'll notice that she has a shine in the outside bottom corner of her eye in this eye, and the right side bottom corner on this eye. So you do want to keep all of this eye on this side and all of this eye on this side. Same over here. Her cheeks are broken up because all of her blocks are flipped. So you're going to go through. And every time you import a model from Tabula to Blockbench, all of your blocks will get flipped. Not sure why it does that. It's just something you have to work around. Her collar, I can't remember what it says off the top of my head. It's in Digicode, which is a font made for the Digimon games. Because I know that all of these blocks are flipped, I know that whatever it says, it's saying it, whoops, it is saying it backwards. So I'm going to go ahead and flip all of these. Alright, and I think that's right. Unless you're really into Digimon, you can't actually read this. It probably says something like Digimobs or Salomon. Alright, so there we go. That is pretty much all you need to do. There are a couple of further things you could do with the texture if you wanted. Because we can now draw on blocks, if you notice any texture issues, you can go in and fix them. Say whoever made the model originally hadn't painted around the sides of each of these blocks when they were doing the eyes, you could correct that pretty quickly with the color picker tool and the paintbrush. What I tend to do, because when I made these models originally, I was going back and forth between paint.net, which is a free downloadable art program, and Tabula. I tended to just paint the entire texture map a base color of whatever color most of my Digimon was going to be, and then hide that color and paint all of the details on top. I probably don't really need to explain how to do it because I doubt any of you are going to need to do that, but it resulted in these textures that looked like this. Often, if you notice your texture is a lot bigger than what it needs to be, and texture files do take up quite a bit of space, so if you can do this, it is very helpful in the grand scheme of things. Oops. You want to remake your texture. So to make a texture, I'll go into this eventually in a texturing tutorial in more depth, but you click template and all of these appear. Rearrange UV, yes, it can rearrange the layout. Compress template, that's fine. Power of 2 size, I always unclick because you don't need your texture map to be that big if it's 480 by 480 or something like that, which we have down here. It's not a power of 2, but it's fine. Keep multi-texture occupancy, yes, because if, for example, all of the little white blocks on the feet occupy the same space, that's fine because they're all just white, and it will keep your size smaller. As far as resolution goes, you have some options. 16 is the default Minecraft texture resolution, 16 pixels on a block with the default Minecraft texture. 32 would be double that, 64 would be double that again, 4 times that. Don't go any bigger than 64 because you will be bloating your texture way too much and no one will notice or care in-game how finely detailed your texture is. I know for a fact that Salomon is 64 by 64 or 64 resolution, so I'm going to go ahead with that, confirm it. And Blockbench is going to cut out all of that extra space, and you'll see we went from 480 to 384, which is quite a big difference. If we did that for every Digimon, the mod would be a lot smaller than it would be otherwise. Now, how did I know Salomon was 64 by 64, or 64 pixel resolution? Because I made Salomon and I remember, but if I hadn't, you would choose a block with preferably a block with some sort of texture on it to compare it to. Press G, which brings up the texture grid. And you'll see this block, which is 5 by 2 by 1, is not 2 pixels tall. It is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Which means it's 4 times the default resolution. It's 4 times 16 by 16, which is 64 pixels. I don't usually leave the grid open because it makes the program a little laggy. If your laptop or your computer is better than mine, it might not do that. Again, up to you. But here we have Salomon. She is fixed. She is ready to animate. Once you get started animating your model, you might notice that the pivot points or the bones that came with the model don't work quite right. It is easy to move those around in Blockbench. We already saw how to do it with the tail. If you wanted to move the body pivot, which I might actually because I like having it closer to the hips, just drag it, nothing else moves, you just move the pivot. And that way, if we were to make her sit, she would go like that. If we wanted to bend these down so the sitting animation looked better, we would go like that. Now here we see this is clipping out of the model. That's fine. You don't have to put a lot of work into correcting and updating these models if they look okay, but if this is something you do want to fix, I would duplicate this, center the pivot because they get all messed up when you're resolving blocks, and then just rotate it a bit. Snap it to the corner. Nope. Rotate it a bit more. Try it again. And now we have a kind of a bend and a blend for when she sits and you want to bend her front legs back quite a bit. Once you straighten her leg, you can't see it. This is something you can fix before you start animating, or you can fix it as you notice problems while you're animating, which is how I tend to do it. Again, that is up to you. Once you do it, you probably want it on both sides, so you're just going to make sure the left arm is the same as the right arm. Now, a couple more things before I finish this video. One is that the lefts and rights are switched. Back to the top of the outline. That is an easy fix. You select the entire thing, you flip it along the x-axis. Not much changes, but this leg on the left side is now the left leg. Secondly, in Tabula and Techne, you could give bones the same name. So if this bone was named body, I could, if I wanted to, create another bone and also name it body. You can't do that in Blockbench. It automatically adds a number at the end so that the names are different. However, if you import them, it doesn't do that automatically. So what you need to do is you want to go to Edit, and you want to go to Rename Duplicates, and that will just make sure that any errors in the naming are fixed. For Digimobs, if Cyan, or if you're not from Digimobs, whoever your mod dev is going to put a Blockbench model into game, and the duplicates are not renamed, it won't work, and they're going to have to fix it themselves, which it's an easy fix. We don't need to make them do that. So remember to rename the duplicates. I think that's it from me. I will be doing one for Techne models shortly, but in the meantime, have fun converting from Tabula to Blockbench.